What is up, Wizards fans? We finally have some cool stuff to talk about here. The trade deadline is now officially over, although some details are still kind of spilling in here after the fact. So if any of these details change a little bit after 5 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, don't hold it against us. We're doing our best with the information we have. Got Jim Coulter here, Wizards Weekly, joining me. Jim, what'd you think overall so far?
I mean, I think this was great work. I came into the deadline, frankly, with pretty low expectations,
Same.
and to come out of it with 2 first-round picks, albeit late firsts, but still pretty impressive, especially the last deal. I know we'll talk about that, the getting Marcus Smart in here. I think obviously getting a first-round pick is probably the biggest news in that deal, but I love adding Marcus Smart to this team just from a veteran leadership mentality standpoint. I think he brings a lot to the table, and I think Chris Middleton does a lot as well. So I like the vets they brought in. I like getting 2 first-round picks. I think it was great work, frankly.
I'm not gonna get on here and pretend like I didn't like Kyle Kuzma. Like, he was one of my favorite Wizards of this decade for the first probably 2 full seasons, and it was just clear at a certain point like they weren't on the same page, and it was just time for a change. And just now where they're at in the stage of development that they're at, I think Middleton and ideally Smart, uh, Middleton more so in my opinion, fit exactly what you'd want in a veteran around these guys. Like, relatively low usage in terms of the style of play. Like, he doesn't need a ton of dribbles to do what he does. And he's someone that I think the young guys could actually make him look good, and he'll make them look better in return. The Marcus Smart one is a little interesting for me. Like, I think the things he can teach them off the court are really impressive. I think the energy he'll bring will be really good for them. There were definitely times this year where they were totally non-competitive, and I feel like that's harder to do with a Marcus Smart on your bench, is to come out totally flat, because that's a dude that won't stomach that. There have been stretches of his NBA career, though, where he's been a little bit of a game breaker. That happened. It's honestly the reason why he's not still a Boston Celtic, probably. So that makes me a little bit nervous, but hopefully, he understands where he is at this point in his career. And the nice thing is, you could just move on from him if it doesn't fit. Like, he's going to be easy to flip in return. So it's a relatively I wouldn't say high reward here, but pretty solid return on these guys, and almost no risk associated with it. So I think you can't call this anything other than a win of a deadline overall. We could maybe argue semantics over how much of a win, but definitely I think Wizards fans should feel good right now.
Yeah, and on Kyle Kuzma, I do agree the first couple of years he was here, I was a big fan of his. I respect the fact that he re-signed here and he wanted to be here.
Yep.
But this year was clearly just not, for whatever reason, the relationship had run its course. I'll put it that way. So, I was happy to see him land in a new place, and I hope he does well. I don't have any, bad feeling towards him. I just think it was time for that to end. And, with Marcus Smart, like you said, I remember when he was in Boston, it felt like every big play always ended up in Marcus Smart's hands, for better or for worse. So hopefully, like you said, he accepts his role. But I remember a few episodes ago during the losing streak, you were talking about how we need kind of someone with an attitude on this team. And that was just kind of the first thought that came to my mind with Marcus Smart, was just, I think he's going to bring a competitive juice to this team that hasn't always been there throughout the whole season. So
I'm a firm believer in the MFer theory. You need a certain amount of MFers on every team, and the number seems to be around 1.5. Some teams can survive 2. Some you just want one strong one if they're a strong enough presence. So I think Smart is probably that guy for this team, at least for the short term here. And, somebody like Bub that seems to have a similar amount of competitive fire, I think can hopefully learn from Smart on when to channel that and how best to channel it. Before we get too far into this, we're brought to you by Stateside Vodka and their Surfside Hard Iced Teas and BetOnline. The biggest betting weekend of the year is finally here, which means updated odds and props for Super Sunday. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. We have hundreds of prop bets, MVP odds, exclusive. Oh my God, it's a long day. Exclusive in-game live betting. BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion, whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor. BetOnline offers you everything and more to enhance your game day experience. Visit the website today. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, let's just start with the full details of the first trade here. We've alluded to it already, but the Milwaukee Bucks send Chris Middleton, AJ Johnson, a rookie out of the Australian NBL, and a pick swap to the Washington Wizards in return for Kyle Kuzma, Patrick Baldwin, and a second-round pick. Chris Middleton, by all accounts, is here to stay. It's what Josh Robbins of the Athletic is reporting, that they want to keep him. And my gut is that just, given what they do, they'll try to flip him, for assets of some sort too, and just keep stockpiling second-round picks, whenever they can get it, or maybe when he's an expiring, you can find somebody that sees positive value of him, and get a first at it, whatever the case may be. I think they're just going to keep trying to roll these things forward and get assets in the process, and then get more assets from the guys that come with those assets, and just sort of build their draft capital up along the way. So I don't know, what's your sort of overall reaction to this trade in a vacuum?
I liked it. I know this one kind of got some mixed reactions on Twitter, at least, but I love bringing in Chris Middleton for the reasons we've said. And I think, swapping out Kuzma for Middleton, there's just an added level of spacing that he adds. And I think that'll help, a lot of our young guys like Koulibaly, Jordan Poole, whereas Kuzma, especially this year, was just not providing any of that. So I think just on the floor, he helps. And then he's a great veteran presence. He's won a championship. I think for Keyshawn George specifically, he can help a ton just because they're kind of similar in the way that they operate. They're not going to win with athleticism or crazy first step, but just really crafty and play at their own speeds. I think he could help Keyshawn George a ton. So I like it from that aspect as well.
That's such a good call. And honestly, I hadn't thought about that at all, but just the moves and the wiggle, but the shooting is going to be probably the primary value they bring offensively, but they're still like good secondary creators. Like that's actually a great call there.
Yeah. And I think, back in the day, Middleton was a really good defender. I think injuries have kind of sapped some of that from him, but he's not going to take away anything on that end of the floor, which is clearly a priority for the front office. So I just love everything about the Middleton deal. Like I really think it's a good deal for us. And if he stays healthy, recoups some value next year, he'll probably pick up that player option. I think it's $34 million. I don't see how he turns that down, but maybe you can get some value for him as an expiring next deadline if he, stays remotely healthy the next year or so. But I like that aspect of the deal a lot. So.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing to look at here too, is it might lead to more additional accumulation of draft capital down the road. So they're not even done with what they got, in that return potentially. I mean, maybe he's so beat up you get nothing from it and it's no harm, no foul. But I saw this when I was sitting in my work staff meeting. It was incredibly boring. And I had my phone on vibrate and just kept getting text after text. And the first thing I saw was, Chris Middleton goes out, or, comes in, and Kuzma goes out, and the Wizards are giving up second-round draft compensation. And I was like, we're sending out multiple second-round picks in the process. Like, we shouldn't be giving up that many picks for this. And it ultimately ended up one, which is fine. I think the pick swap is largely meaningless. It's the chances of them getting anything more than like a negligible upgrade from that pick swap, I think is probably pretty low. Just considering the teams involved there. So that's fine. So it's really just getting rid of Kuzma, getting rid of Baldwin, which no harm, no foul there. He wasn't in the rotation at all anyway. And taking a bet on a young guy like AJ Johnson. I think how strongly you like the return here is probably largely colored by your reaction to AJ Johnson as a pick. I did not like him pre-draft all that much personally. I would very much love for him to like make me look super stupid, and that's great. My only reaction to him as the guy they bring in is he's another raw guy that needs minutes and time to develop. And you already have a lot of raw guys that need minutes and time to develop. And he had some athleticism, but he's another guy that isn't really a shooter. And that's sort of the one thing I would say about their guys right now. Like Keyshawn should be a shooter, but he's not at the moment. Like, Bub's getting a little better, I think. Sar's gotten better, but I wouldn't call any of them shooters. So it's just another guy that needs a lot of work, and he's a project. So that like hampered how excited I was about that in the moment. But, I don't mind the bet on the athleticism, and he's probably a guy that you can let play some minutes for the go-go right now. And that's okay. And that propels him forward. And if you have something there, then, maybe you add him, slowly over time into the rotation with the Wizards here as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was definitely a little higher on AJ Johnson
Mhm.
pre-draft than it sounds like you were. Like, I thought late first he was worth a shot, just based on the talent. I mean, he was really bad in the NBL. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna sugarcoat it.
Yep.
The year before the draft, but that is a professional league, and he's
Mhm.
like 155, probably was like 155 pounds at the time.
He's
So
maybe up to 165 right now. Like he's still small, but this is in the
yeah,
right direction at least.
yeah. So you got to get him in a weight room. He's like a couple years away,
Yeah.
which is why it didn't really make sense for the Bucks. But for
Mhm.
a team like us, like we have time to
Sure.
let him develop. He's not a great shooter yet, but I don't think anything's wrong with the form
Yeah.
necessarily. And he is really dynamic with the ball, and he has decent size, 6'5", with decent length. Like, I think there is some upside there. It's worth a shot.
There's a lot of upside. It's just
Yeah,
he may never get there, and that's
yeah.
okay. It's a swing, and I'm cool with the swing.
It's a swing, and I think, if you look at it from, like, last deadline where we could have gotten at least one first for Kuz. I know the
Mhm.
reporting's been all over the place on that, but, like, yeah, the return's gonna be a little disappointing,
Yeah.
compared to what we could have gotten for him last year, but you get a young guy with a lot of upside. You get, Middleton back, who we just talked about. Like, I do think the return's a little bit better than I was expecting for this deadline. Obviously, they held on to him too long, but, I think they did a decent job here just for the situation they were in at the time. So
I think that's a good way to say it. They made the most of the hand that they kind of dealt themselves, and that's okay. I looked at it from a man. You re-sign this guy, you had to get something for him, and in a vacuum, you're getting relatively little back, especially when you color it to sort of expectations. And this last year, if we're holding out for 2 first-round picks, like, they were probably never really gonna get that, but was a young pick and an AJ Johnson or a pick and an AJ Johnson type on the table, last year, like that's sort of more in the realm, I think, of where I was at mentally last season. So just looking at it year over year, I was taking the man, we kind of fumbled the bag here a little bit by waiting too long. And that does seem to be kind of a theme for them. Like they're willing to be patient and kind of like play trade chicken with some of these veteran assets. And it hasn't really worked out for them yet. It doesn't mean that it won't at some point. So that's how I kind of took it, and thus was a little underwhelmed by the return. And I got a whole bunch of stupid replies about, bro, it's just a second round pick. They're meaningless. Why do you give a shit? Which isn't remotely the point for any of the idiots that commented that at me that are listening to this right now. But uh, also, second round picks, not that meaningless because we just did a lot of other things with second round picks in these later trades. So you can't have it both ways. But in a vacuum, like they've got to start to nail a few of these guys. Some people I really love on Wizards Twitter, and I would disagree on this a little bit. And everything in their opinion that happens with this rebuild is totally based on how well they draft, and that's obviously going to drive the majority of what they do. But good teams still make smart, savvy moves on the margins. They add Justin Champagnes and keep them for cheap deals long term, and all these kind of other things that I hope the Wizards are building toward. Like that's a good talent identification right now. So they've got to keep finding more guys like that, and um, it's just those kind of little things. Like you can't afford to squander every little pick here and there. Like you've got to nail a few of these things to jumpstart your rebuild because you're not going to hit on every pick. I think we all like Bub, we all like Keyshawn, we all like Sar, we all like Bilal, but odds are one of those 4 guys at a minimum probably doesn't end up being all that much ultimately in the NBA. And if they go for 4 right out of the gate, like that's amazing, but they're not going to bat 1,000 for forever here. So you need as many dudes as possible. And they ultimately get those things, which ended up working out great. But uh, it's hindsight, right? Like nobody knew that at noon yesterday when this trade broke.
right, like, I mean, if you look at Keyshawn George, like, I think he's shown a ton this year, and I wasn't even super high on him coming into the year, but that's the 24th pick in the draft.
Yeah.
Like, getting those late firsts may not seem like much, but you hit on one out of the
Mm-hmm.
3 they've gotten in trades the last few years
Right.
between Keyshawn, the one in 2025, the one in 2026. Like, that's ginormous. I mean, obviously, the picks we get in the top 5 are gonna probably determine this thing,
Sure.
but, like, adding those types of things on the margin are extremely important. So I'm with you there. And I guess just last point on the Kuzma trade, like I do think there is some addition by subtraction here. We already saw it last night, Bilal just getting the ball so much more, and getting that development for the last like 40 games of the season is very, very valuable. And that is a part of the Kuzma trade, was making sure that his development is prioritized. So
I want to circle back to that at the end of this,
okay.
because that's the last thing I've got on my rundown here for us, is just how much do we think these veteran guys will play? So, Jim, whether it's you or somebody in the chat here, hold me accountable and make sure that I don't forget to drive us back around to that. But overall, a good trade, right? Like that one I would have given like a solid B for, I think. Like it's good. I'm not blown away by it, but like they did pretty well. The next one here, they trade out Jonas Valanciunas to Sacramento, and in return, they get City Sissoko, who they eventually waived, and 2 second-round picks. And second-round picks is their bread and butter. Eventually, they will own all second-round picks, even though they gave up one here in this process. But I think that was the best you were going to do for Valanciunas at this point, was just get 2 second-round picks. I would have liked to see Sissoko stick around here. Like that's still kind of up in the air. Maybe they can get him on a G League contract or something like that and convince him to stick around. But, he does have some talent, some upside, and the French connection thing is just cool. Might as well keep our young guys that are French happy. Eventually, when they have to make their contract decisions for the future, like, us taking care of their boys is probably not a bad thing to do here. But I don't know. Just to me, pretty solid and probably best we could have expected for Valanciunas.
Yeah, I agree. Like Valanciunas at this point in his career, like he's a backup center.
Yeah.
He's not a bad backup center. I actually enjoyed his time with the Wizards.
Nice change of pace guy too. Like
yeah. And I think him and Sabonis together can run some similar things. So I think for the Kings it makes some sense. And
that's a good point.
I don't think you can expect a whole lot more back for a solid backup center than a couple seconds and maybe an intriguing young player. I was hoping they'd keep Sissoko around too. Like I was a fan of him. I remember watching him when I was watching Scoot Henderson with the G League, and I loved his effort, and he's got some decent physical tools. His defense is pretty good. He kind of seemed like a guy who fit the mold of what the front office wanted. So I thought he was going to stick around. I was surprised when they waived him, but yeah, hopefully they can get him back. I think he does have some long-term potential. So
that'd be another one of those steal kind of things. Like that's a guy that certain people I value in the draft community had like a top 20 grade on, around that range. And if that guy turns into anything, great. And if he's an end of the bench guy, even, like it's still not the worst dude to take a flyer on. So we'll see how that kind of plays itself out. The next deal here, which is slightly more complicated. So I will read through this. And if anything shifted since I put this in my notes, somebody in the chat correct me here, but the Wizards send out a 2027 second round pick. It's the most favorable of Golden State's and Phoenix's. So not their own second round pick, which I think is good. The Phoenix and Golden State ones are going to be much lower and weaker second round picks. A 2028 Golden State second round pick, same deal. A 2030 second round pick. So the most favorable of Phoenix and Portland. That one could ultimately end up being a little better if Portland is still kind of floundering in the rebuild here, or Phoenix totally falls apart by then. We'll see. And then the Wizards own 2030 second round pick. Hopefully the Wizards are a reasonable team by 2030 for the sake of my own mental health. So ultimately probably not that much. Jared Butler does go out. I really like Jared Butler. Everybody listens to this show knows I really like Jared Butler. So like I'm bummed from a personal standpoint to not see him play, but also seemed like a really good dude. And I just want him to stick in the league. So going to a place where he actually makes a lot of sense and I think can contribute for them is probably better for him in the long run here anyway than not really getting minutes for the Wizards. So, I'm not too sad about that overall. And the Wizards get back a first round pick, but it's the least favorable of Oklahoma City, Houston, or the Clippers. So that first round pick is best case scenario, the 27th pick or later, in a draft year, it seems like. So it's still a first round pick, and all of these second round picks we've already seen the Wizards do this once, use that to move up to 22, 23, something like that in a later draft would be nice. And they also get Reggie Jackson back who they immediately moved on from too. So I'm actually super happy most about the Reggie Jackson part because I did not want to have to watch him play basketball for the Wizards this year.
Yeah, I agree with that last part for sure. Because Reggie's the type of guy who he kind of needs the ball in his hands to play his game, and I would just rather it be in other people's hands. So, but no, I am going to miss Jared Butler a ton. I was a huge fan of his. Even going back to Baylor, I just loved his game. And then, if I remember correctly, he dealt with some kind of health issues, and so I don't know. I was just rooting for him. I liked what he brought to us. I wish we would have given him a little bit more opportunity, but I just don't think he fit in the front office's plans at all. He's an under 6'2" guard, and I just don't think that's anything the front office is interested in. And I think there's some validity to that. But I will miss Jared Butler, and I've already seen Sixers fans on Twitter kind of being like, he's our second, third best guard already, and he's going to get some opportunity, like you said. So, but getting that late first it's definitely a good deal, even though I like Jared Butler. 4 seconds it might end up being the 30th pick in the draft. I mean, it very well could be the latest first possible, but I still think it's a smart deal, especially when you have so many seconds already to just consolidate them into another first. It makes a lot of sense. So
you have to use those picks for that as just sort of incentives and other deals. You can't draft 25 second round picks over the next 6 years or whatever the case may be. So that had to happen at some point, and I hope they keep using them for that. Just even incremental, get up 2 picks to get the guy you want or whatever is worth a couple seconds in the process. Honestly, the odds of who they draft at 30 ending up being better than Jared Butler is probably small, realistically. I mean, or is it 50-50? I would say at best, but at least the shot on getting somebody better, that fits their mold a little bit better, I think is worth it. It was just kind of funny to me, all those Bradley Beal teams that desperately needed a backup point guard that was solid. I feel like if Jared Butler was just 5 years older, he would have been a perfect kind of ancillary piece off the bench for some of those teams that were trying to win, but we never had a backup guard. So just kind of funny. He was a little too late for us.
Yeah. When we brought back Isaiah Thomas after the hip injury, he could have helped on some of those teams for sure. But as much as I do like Jared Butler, he's not changing anything in the long run for the franchise. So like you said, you take another chance that pick 28 is something significant. So I like the process there of just getting another first, but
just rolling it forward. And like we said, giving yourselves more of those opportunities, I think is worth it. And that's similarly what's going to come out of this next deal we're going to talk about here as well. So the Wizards bring in Marcus Smart from Memphis. They also get Colby Jones and Alex Len from Sacramento. And then what I think, again, appears to be the 2025 first-round pick from Memphis. We were talking about that before we got going here. So that's pretty good. It's probably a late first-round pick again, but we'll take it. I had a really high grade on Colby Jones personally. Kind of late shooting is always a little questionable sometimes for a third-year guy. Is that real or not? And by all accounts, he hasn't really done much in the NBA yet here. He was also sort of beat up for almost an entire season. So I'm hopeful this is a guy that maybe has a little juice. They can rejuvenate a little bit of his value here. But smart guy, does a lot of good things with the basketball, makes winning plays, as stupid as that sounds, but he did that at the college level. So I think he's a great pick. And our guy Kevin Broom over at Bulls Forever had a really good grade for Colby as well. And then obviously everybody here is familiar with Alex Len and what he brings to the table at this point. So I can't wait to at some point see the Alex Len, Rashawn Holmes front court duo out there together again. But not a bad return. And all you're giving up in the process is Marvin Bagley III and Johnny Davis, which it's basically a salary dump for Memphis at this point to move on from Smart. And we got incentivized to do it. So I think that's a win-win for us as well. And that's what our cap space should go to.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how the front office has kind of used the new salary cap rules to their advantage, where they're just taking on bad salaries like Middleton and Marcus Smart to help out these teams that are actually trying to compete, because all of our key assets are on rookie deals. They're all cheap. So I love this strategy. Yeah, I love this strategy from the Wizards, especially as a team that, especially when Dawkins came here, didn't have a ton of assets to turn into first round picks. Like this is a new way to kind of do that. So I think it's really smart from the front office to continue doing this. I did not watch Colby Jones in college, and I will be honest, I don't think I've ever seen him play basketball in the NBA. So I have literally zero opinion. I will fully take whatever you say on Colby Jones. So
let's see what he's done in the NBA thus far. I don't think it's much. I think Sacramento is probably the most competent NBA team over the last couple of years I've watched the least of.
Yeah.
So not ideal. Yeah. So as a rookie, he only played 30 games, largely due to injury. This year, he's appeared in 24 games, playing about 5 minutes a game. So not really much there to speak of, unfortunately, for him. But that's okay. Maybe this is a diamond in the rough. I think this is why you bring a lot of guys in pre-draft. I don't know that they did that with Colby Jones. I don't remember specifically, but you start files on these guys, and maybe this is a buy low guy, that you can take a shot on. And spent 3 years at Xavier. His last year there, he averaged 15 points, about 6 rebounds, 4.5 assists, a steal and a half. Shot pretty well from three, about 38% that junior year. So just tough defender, does good stuff, a little bit of on-ball juice. So I think, if he turns into something great, and if he doesn't, it really doesn't matter. This whole thing is essentially about the first round pick. And then maybe next year you can flip Smart again for something and try to do the Brogdon thing all over again. And maybe, you get another 2 second round picks or whatever the case may be, and just kind of keep those things rolling like we talked about. Jim, I think the single most important word that you've said this entire podcast was strategy. And it just felt for, the last 25 years that these like situations came up and there was no like, here's the plan that we're executing toward. These things, as you see them all sort of pieced together now, like it's a little bit of like the Charlie from Always Sunny meme with all the like push pins like tied together down in the mailroom. But like there was clearly like a blueprint here that they were trying to follow, and you nailed it with trying to use the cap smartly. But each of these deals, I became sort of increasingly more appreciative of what they were doing as I saw them kind of piece together of like, oh, okay, so this thing, it makes a little more sense now because it kicked off this thing. And like, that's just what you want to feel at the end of the deadline. And I know there are fans of other teams that I've been texting with today that just like, what the shit is my team doing? So you shouldn't end up confused at the end of what your team's approach was or path forward. Like whether I, ultimately want to nitpick about one more second here would have been good or whatever. Like it doesn't matter because they had an objective. And I think it's very clear that it was get as much real draft capital somewhere in the first round when they could. And they hit on that objective for sure.
Yeah, like I think the perfect example of this is the Valanciunas deal, then into the Smart deal where they only get 2 seconds back for Valanciunas, but then that gives them 4 seconds to go get another first round pick from the Sixers. I guess that's the Butler deal, not the Smart deal. But, they value those second round picks, like you said, to move up a spot or two late in the first. So they're able to replenish that. And it just, I don't know, like you said, everything did kind of start to make sense. And like, they're not going to hit on every pick. Not every single selection is going to become an all-star, but this is really good process. And this is what good teams and good organizations do is they stack assets and then you figure it out down the road. Like, look at the Thunder. They're probably the perfect example of this. They just keep stacking picks and making smart trades and smart selections in the draft. And eventually you're going to hit on some big time. I mean, the pick either before or after Jalen Williams was Ousmane Dieng. Like you're not going to hit on every one, but you get enough swings of the bat and you're eventually going to hit a home run. So I really like what they've done.
Conversely, the 2 picks after Johnny Davis was Jalen Williams. So like it goes either way here too. I'm totally with you. I think that's just been sort of the most refreshing thing to see. Like I am a fan, like I am going to react sometimes in the moment of like, what the hell was this? And but when you can eventually sort of like see, oh, okay, they're doing this. Like I will always give a team a benefit of the doubt of like, okay, they clearly had a goal in mind here and they worked toward it. So that's very cool. And I'm not smart enough on the cap to do, this taxpayer mid-level exception or this trade exception they created was parlayed into this thing and all those other things. If you want trade exception talk. We can get somebody on here to do some trade exception talk for you. But I think that's another ingredient here too, is these things, sort of piece themselves together. My guy, it never makes no sense in the chat. We generated the money for the Smart deal off of trading JV for a minimum as well. We didn't have the $10 million to eat before Smart today. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's perfect, right? Like we'll have the cap guys chime in here and tell us what created what, but that was a domino that had to fall before the next domino could fall. And that ultimately leads to the final deal here that we have already alluded to a couple times here, but the Grizzlies sent Marcus Smart to the Wizards. Wizards could turn him, into something else here down the road, which is nice, or they keep him and he's a nice vet. So we'll see, in the summer what that ultimately turns into here, but just really good. And, shout out to my guy, Greg Finberg on Twitter here. I'm sure every Wizards fan's following Greg at this point. The nice put all of the news in one place guy for all of the rest of us, which is an unbelievable service. And I told him already, save me some time here, but in aggregate, the Wizards bring in Chris Middleton, Marcus Smart, Colby Jones, Alex Len, AJ Johnson, 25 and 26 first-round picks, a 2028 first-round swap, and 2 second-round picks. In the process, they send out Kyle Kuzma, Jared Butler, Jonas Valanciunas, Patrick Baldwin, Marvin Bagley, Johnny Davis, and 5 second-round picks. Again, there's clearly a plan here. You walk out of this with 2 first-round picks, a swap. We'll see what that turns into, and 2 more second-round picks to kind of even out what you gave up. Like you moved all guys that weren't in your future for pieces that could be, and I'm all board, with that.
Yep, for sure.
All right, just let's talk to this one thing I already teased here that you brought up earlier, and then we'll get out of here and I'll let you get back to your evening. Last night was so fun to watch. The Wizards were, I don't know, it was euphoric watching them play. I didn't get to check it out till very early this morning here when I finally finished the game, and it was just cool to see the ball movement involved there. Like just the thing zipped around. It's what you want to see. We saw flashes of that early this season when all the rookies were playing together, and Poole seems to need less dribbles when he plays with those guys. And honestly, maybe part of it is just he has faith that he'll get it back and they'll kind of reward the process as well here too. And they do defer to him still, which they should. He's the best offensive player on the team right now, but it's not sticking with him, which I think is what you want to see when he's out there with those young guys. What I do worry about though is, if you want to rehab Chris Middleton's value, he doesn't need the ball a lot, but he will need some shots, and you probably want to play him a healthy dose of minutes. He doesn't want to be the guy that sits on the end of the bench for the whole rest of the year here, or maybe you get a disgruntled Chris Middleton. Marcus Smart, we'll see, how much he wants touches. Colby Jones, you'd like to see some minutes for, just to see if he can do anything for you or move on from him. Alex Len, I don't expect to play much here at all, other than maybe to replace Valanciunas as a big body off the bench here. AJ Johnson, presumably you're going to find some minutes for, but maybe he's okay starting in the G League until you shut some of the vets down at the end of the year. But I don't know, those are still guys you're going to have to fit in here. Do you think we see some regression from what we saw last night in terms of how much the rookies actually get to go out there and do their thing?
I mean, I guess because I think Middleton's going to play, and he will probably start. I mean, he's not.
I would think so too.
I don't think he's going to come off the bench for
Agreed.
a 9-win team.
That's not a good look, and they won't do that to a guy of his stature, locker room chemistry wise.
Yeah, so he will inevitably eat into some of the minutes, but he's kind of used to playing as like the second or third option in Milwaukee. So I don't think he's someone that is going to demand the ball too much. And he's a good off-ball player because he's such a good spacer from 3. So I mean, he will inevitably eat into some of the minutes, especially like I would project Keyshawn George probably doesn't start anymore,
agreed.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, but he's still going to play a ton. Like all these guys are still going to play a lot. And I would expect, especially with Bilal, like I thought it was really telling just how much they put the ball in his hands to start the game, especially like it was kind of like, this is your show now. And so I don't think they're going to take a whole lot away from him in particular. But yeah, he probably will take away some. And Marcus Smart will be interesting to see what they do with him. I really have honestly no idea. So I don't know if you have any opinions on what you think they're going to do. I got to think about that. So
I think you could get away without starting him just because of how like unhealthy he's been. He's played in less than 40 total games so far between this season and all of last season. Played 20 games last year, started all 20 of them. So far this year, he's played in 19 games, only started 6 of them, is playing about 20 minutes a game. My gut is that whether they start him or don't, if you get him in that 20-minute a game range, it's probably okay. I kind of still think there might be some more stuff that happens. Do you buy out a Brogdon or someone like that and reward it like a good guy like that to be able to go, try to join a contender down the stretch here? Like that ultimately wouldn't surprise me. And that offsets some of it. If it's just a 1-for-1 swap of Smart taking Brogdon's minutes, like it's no big deal. But trying to find minutes for all of them is where I think it gets a little dicey. But with him, you don't have to play him a ton. Both of these are guys that have had some injury stuff here, over the last couple of years here. Middleton only played in 55 games last year, 33 the year before that. He started 7 of their 23 games so far this year. So, and averaging 23 minutes a game. Like, you don't have to like run him into the ground, I think, which is nice. Maybe you don't play him on the second night of back-to-backs. And it kind of reminds me of a couple of years ago when they jump-started the Oklahoma City rebuild. They brought in Al Horford and like barely played him, but it was an opportunity for him to just like rest and heal his body. And then they turned him into a, stuff, and a productive NBA career, continued after that sort of one rehab year. So maybe they could just lightly play some of these guys, let them get their sea legs and be healthy and not feel forced to play. Like if you're Chris Middleton and you want to win and you're on the Bucks, you probably feel pressure to get out there and like limp around on one leg or whatever the case may be. You don't have to do that here anymore.
Yeah, and like they can kind of not play him 30 minutes a game under the guise of like we're trying to save their legs and not let them get injured. So yeah, I don't think it'll be anything that disrupts their flow, especially because like with Smart, he's not necessarily like a primary ball handler or anything. He's always played as kind of an off ball 3-and-D guard. So I don't think he would take away too much. Buying out Brogdon's interesting. I hadn't thought about that just because I know you've talked about this. Like Bub has been so much more effective with the ball in his hands this year.
Yeah.
And so adding Smart to Brogdon already does kind of limit some of his opportunities. So that's interesting. Maybe I think they might want to look into that. I hadn't thought about that before.
You at least probably pose the question to him if you're that, like you give him the, hey, what do you want to do here? Kind of thing. And my gut says he probably would be happier, going somewhere else. And that seems to be a priority for this front office, is how they're viewed, by agents as well. So I think that's in their best interest long-term to do him a solid. Hanging on to him for the rest of the year really does nothing for you. So other than like, take some of those minutes away, it's not you've learned everything you can learn from him, but like I'm at least, Bub's gotten to pick his brain throughout the year and things like that. So yeah, I think this is good. Like Chris Middleton, like hurt or not, he's not a take a night off kind of guy. Like he plays hard, he plays smart basketball. I think that's good for them from an IQ standpoint. Like you said already, it's especially good for Keyshawn to learn from. Bob could value learning some from Smart as well here too. And again, just from a competitive standpoint, like you're not going to take a night off next to him. And that was honestly, I think, the single best thing Russell Westbrook did in his time here was just like dudes had to bring it next to him or he was in your face. And I think Smart's the kind of guy that would do that too. And again, I've been pro Kuzma. I'm not trying to like flip flop now, but like, I don't think he was that guy. Like, I think he helped them a lot off the court. They all said he did early, but I don't think he was like challenging dudes in the locker room if they were like loafing on defense. That didn't seem like his vibe. So it'd be good to get a little of that. Not that these rookies need it, but sometimes you do need a little kick in the ass from somebody who's been there. So overall, I think I would say like, B plus, A minus, somewhere in that kind of range for the deadline here. And I think that's really kind of the best you could hope for. So rating on a curve, I don't know, let's go A minus for the deadline.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Jim, anything we didn't touch on here that you want to hit before we wrap up?
Not really, man. I mean, I wanted to talk about the Nets game a little bit, so I'm glad we were able to touch on that. Because that was just fun. That was a lot of fun. And I'm hoping to see some more basketball like that down the stretch here. So
we deserve it. Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this on short notice here too. I really appreciate it. And I hopefully it's a good convo for everybody and should give us more to talk about, at least in the coming weeks here, just to see, how these guys all sort of look on paper and what the other little finer details are that start to emerge from all these trades. So, Jim, thank you for your time. Thanks everybody for tuning in here. If you have things you want to talk about specifically post trade deadline, let us know and we'll make sure that we hit those in subsequent episodes. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like button for us. Oh, Jim, by the way, plug the podcast for us. If anyone is not already listening to your podcast, they should go out and do it. It's very good and a much smarter basketball mind than mine. So I feel like I learned something from it every time.
Thanks, Matt. It's Wizards Weekly. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to. You can follow me on X at Wiz_weekly. And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate you. All right, everybody. Presented by betonline.ag, and we'll catch y'all next time.